He was loud, cruel, and untouchable. Everyone in the restaurant lowered their eyes when he entered. Staff froze, customers whispered, and no one ever dared to speak back. The millionaire snapped fingers, threw tantrums, and treated people like shadows. But on one stormy evening, something shifted. A new waitress, young, quiet, unfamiliar, stood at his table. When he barked an order, she didn't flinch. When he mocked her, she didn't blink. And when she finally looked him dead in the eye and spoke, the entire room fell silent. What she said next, no one saw coming. Not even him. "Let's begin." The restaurant glowed with soft chandeliers, polished silverware, and quiet jazz that no one truly heard. It was a place built for luxury, for people like Mr. Granger, the man who owned half the block, who had once sued a waiter for spilling wine. That night, he arrived earlier than usual, stepping through the grand oak doors with a gust of rain at his back. His coat dripped onto the marble floor, ignored by the staff who instinctively scattered before him. Something about the air felt different, though he couldn't place it. The silence had weight, the kind that didn't come from respect but tension. His usual table was waiting, perfectly set, precisely arranged, but he didn't sit. Instead, his eyes scanned the room, narrowed, calculating. A fork slightly misaligned. A candle flickering too low. But it wasn't these details that drew him. It was something he couldn't quite name, a sense of being watched, of balance disturbed. Then he saw her. Not the polished host, nor the trembling busboy, but a girl, young, new, unfamiliar, carrying a tray like it was a shield. Her eyes weren't afraid. That was new. That was wrong. He sat down slowly, one brow arched, and ordered without looking. His voice cut the air like glass. The staff responded like trained animals. But she didn't. The girl barely nodded, turned, and walked away. It wasn't arrogance, it was something else. Calm. Measured. Granger tapped his fingers against the table, eyes locked on her back as she disappeared into the kitchen. Around him, everything looked as it always had, but he knew better. He could feel it. Like a predator sensing the shift before a storm. Like something was about to break. A waiter poured his wine with a shaky hand. Another dropped a spoon and flinched. Mr. Granger noticed every flicker, every glance exchanged behind his back. And still, the girl didn't return. Minutes passed. Unacceptable minutes. He straightened in his chair, jaw tightening. The room was still pretending to breathe, but the walls had already begun to shift. He couldn't name it yet, but he felt it in his bones. Something was off tonight. And for the first time in years, the man everyone feared didn't feel in control. The clink of glass, the murmur of distant diners, the hum of the overhead lights, all of it faded the moment Mr. Granger heard it. A faint sound. Off rhythm. Wrong. It wasn't metal, it wasn't laughter. It was soft, almost muffled, like a whisper colliding with a sob. He turned his head slightly, just enough to track the direction, but no one else seemed to notice. Waiters rushed past like ghosts. The host greeted new guests with his usual fake smile. But Granger's senses, honed from decades of boardroom bloodshed and high-stakes manipulation, locked onto that noise. It came again. A shuffle. A quiet gasp. Like someone was trying not to be heard. He stood. No one expected that. His chair scraped against the floor with a violent screech that turned heads. The room stiffened. Still, no sign of the new waitress. His eyes darted past linen-covered tables, toward the hallway that led to the staff area. And that's when he heard it a third time, closer now. A soft thud. Something falling. Then silence. No one dared speak. He moved toward the back, ignoring the stammering maitre d', trying to redirect him. He pushed through the swinging door into the narrow service corridor, where bright fluorescent lights buzzed like bees. Voices faded behind him. It was just him now. Alone. Until he wasn't. A few steps in, behind a half-closed supply closet door, he heard breathing. Shallow. Uneven. He paused, then reached forward and pushed the door fully open. What he saw stopped him cold. The new waitress, kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a broken plate, her hands trembling. But that wasn't what shocked him. On the floor in front of her, barely visible in the dim light, was a young busboy, maybe 17, shivering, eyes wide with fear. And in his lap, smeared across a napkin, was something Granger couldn't believe. Scraps of cold food, crumbs, and in the corner, a half-eaten dog biscuit. The boy was chewing it. Slowly. Desperately. The waitress didn't even look up. She simply said, "He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Granger stared at them, confused, outraged, disoriented. "Why here? Why now?" he asked, more to himself than anyone. But the boy flinched. The waitress finally looked up, those same calm eyes, and answered, because this is the only place he thought he wouldn't be seen. And for the first time in a long, long while, Granger didn't know what to say. Granger stood frozen in the narrow corridor, his polished shoes inches from broken porcelain and crumbs. The boy refused to look up. The girl never looked away. For a man who ruled with silence and intimidation, he found himself suddenly powerless. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded, voice low but sharp. The waitress blinked once, then slowly rose to her feet, her posture steady, as if the weight of his authority meant nothing. "Doing what?" she asked quietly. Granger gestured angrily at the mess, the boy, the shame of it all. "Feeding him like an animal. On the floor. In my restaurant." The boy flinched again. The girl didn't move. Because when he asked for help, she said, no one listened. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of something heavier than sound. Granger's eyes flicked to the boy again, now wiping his mouth, cheeks red with humiliation, eyes glassy. "He works here?" Granger asked. "He's not even supposed to be back here during service." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's not on the clock anymore. He's been staying after hours. Cleaning. Hiding. Hoping someone would notice he's still hungry." Granger's face hardened. "This is a business, not a shelter." "Then maybe it shouldn't be yours," she snapped. The words landed like a slap. A sharp silence followed. Granger stared at her, stunned. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not his board. Not his staff. Not even his own family. He felt heat rise to his face, fury itching beneath his collar. But she didn't back down. "Do you know what he said to me yesterday?" she asked. Granger didn't answer. She stepped closer. "He said it's better to eat garbage than ask people for food, because garbage doesn't judge you." Her voice trembled, just once. And that tremble shattered something inside the room. Granger looked down at the boy again. He was thin. Too thin. Bones visible beneath his oversized uniform. "What's your name?" Granger asked. The boy didn't answer. "What's your name?" he repeated, louder. But the girl interrupted, softly. "He's scared of you. That's his name right now." And with those 8 words, the powerful man who once terrified an entire restaurant felt like a stranger in his own domain. The air was heavier now, as if truth had settled into every corner of the corridor. Granger leaned against the wall, his breath slower, the fury fading into something unfamiliar, shame. The waitress didn't speak again. She just knelt beside the boy, gently wiping crumbs from his lap, her fingers careful, respectful. It reminded Granger of something. No, someone. A flicker. A woman's hands. A hallway like this one. He blinked and the present dissolved. Years ago, long before the money, long before the arrogance, there had been a boy much like this one. Scared, hungry, hiding behind a vending machine at a rundown bus station while his mother begged the driver for one more stop, one more hour, one more chance. That boy had been him. He hadn't remembered that moment in decades. Or maybe he had, and buried it deep. But it was there now. And it hurt. He looked at the boy again, and for the first time, he saw himself, not the man he had become, but the child he had abandoned along the way. Does he have parents? Granger asked. The girl shook her head. Foster care. 3 homes in 2 years. Nobody wanted him after the second incident. Incident? Granger asked. He tried to steal a sandwich. For his sister. She didn't make it. The words landed like a slow explosion, burning through the sterile corridor. Granger closed his eyes. He didn't want to hear more, but he couldn't walk away. And you? He asked the waitress. Why do you care? She looked up, and for a second her calm cracked. Just a little. Because I used to be him, she said. I know what it feels like to need something so badly it turns your stomach. And I know what it means when no one cares enough to ask why. The boy shifted closer to her, not speaking, just breathing slower now, steadier. The pieces clicked together in Granger's mind like ice forming under his feet. He saw the broken system, the neglected child, the cold machine he had built in his empire, and all the people it chewed up without him noticing. He had been too busy winning, too busy being feared. And somewhere in that ambition, he had forgotten that every plate served came with a story behind it. And sometimes, the story was too painful to speak, until someone brave enough chose to listen. Granger didn't move for a long time. The hallway that once felt like an extension of his power now felt like a corridor of ghosts. Ghosts of all the people he had walked past, ignored, silenced. The boy leaned gently into the waitress's side, eyes half closed, as if her presence alone was enough to keep him from falling apart. Granger watched them with a stillness he didn't recognize in himself. Inside, something broke, not loudly, not with anger, but with quiet clarity. He had failed. Not in business. Not in profit margins or branding. But in something deeper. Something harder to fix. He had built restaurants that looked like cathedrals, where wine flowed and candles flickered, but he'd never once asked if the people carrying those plates were eating themselves. He had created systems where no one questioned him, where fear masked as discipline, and silence was mistaken for efficiency. And now, in the most humiliating way possible, he saw what that silence had cost. The boy had become invisible in his kingdom. The girl had been brave enough to confront it. And Granger, the great titan of hospitality, was the last to see the truth he had built with his own hands. A memory returned. He was 12, soaked in rain, knocking on a stranger's door, begging for food after his mother collapsed on a bench. No one had opened the door. He had vowed never to be that powerless again. But somewhere along the way, he had confused strength with cruelty, protection with isolation. His success had grown, but his soul had starved. I didn't know, he said quietly. The girl didn't reply. I didn't see it. Still nothing. But the boy looked up, just for a second, and Granger caught the briefest flicker of something, doubt, fear, but also the smallest trace of hope. He swallowed hard. I failed, he whispered, and the words tasted foreign in his mouth. He expected them to burn, but instead, they grounded him. For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending to be right. He wasn't commanding. He was just human. What happens now? He asked. The girl stood, gently pulling the boy up with her. That depends, she said softly. Are you done being feared, or are you finally ready to be seen? And in that moment, Mr. Granger, the man with everything, had nothing left to hide behind. Granger stood there, frozen between the man he had always been and the man he might become. The waitress and the boy turned to leave, assuming the conversation was over, but something inside him shifted. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Wait, he said, his voice hoarse. They stopped. He took a breath, the kind that felt like swallowing pride. I want to fix this. The girl turned halfway, skeptical. You can't just write a check. I wasn't offering money, he said. Not yet. His tone had changed. The arrogance was gone. He looked down at the mess. Crumbs, the broken plate, the remnants of a secret meal shared in shame. And then, without another word, he crouched to the floor and began picking up the pieces. Slowly, carefully. The girl blinked. The boy stared. Granger, once known for snapping at staff for fingerprints on wine glasses, now had food on his hands and sweat on his brow. He didn't flinch when a shard nicked his thumb. He didn't bark for someone else to clean it. He just kept gathering the broken bits, placing them on a tray. He needs food, the girl said finally, her voice softer now. Real food. Granger nodded and stood, walked toward the kitchen, and the staff scattered in surprise. He pulled open the fridge himself, found a loaf of bread, some eggs, cheese. His hands were clumsy, but they moved with purpose. A chef tried to intervene, he waved him off. Minutes later, the smell of toast and melted cheese filled the corridor. It wasn't gourmet. It wasn't plated. But it was warm, real, and made with intention. He returned with 2 sandwiches, handing one to the boy, who hesitated before taking it. Granger didn't speak. He just sat on the crate across from him, sandwich in hand, and took a bite. The boy stared at him, unsure. Then slowly, he ate. The girl watched them in silence. It was awkward, even a little absurd. A millionaire eating a plain sandwich beside a boy he'd never noticed, in a hallway that had always belonged to staff. But in that silence, something else bloomed. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But presence. Granger didn't look at his watch. He didn't glance at his phone. He just sat. With them. For once, he wasn't above anyone. He was beside them. And it was the first true step he'd taken in years.